There was nothing else at all in the whole world but football.
Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the FFF Show. I was joined Sunday evening straight after the Arsenal and Man United game by poet, teacher, St Pauli and Manchester United fan and overall football fanatic Tony Kinsella. We talked all about that retro flavoured high octane Premier League clash, the World Cup and the ominous nature of football's future. I hope you all enjoy, and thank you very much again for watching and listening to the FFF. Okay, so I guess the first thing we have to talk about, Tony, is the Man United Arsenal game that's just finished. I think about half an hour ago. It was quite a cracker. Did you enjoy it?
It was absolutely a fantastic game, and I think probably one of the best games of the season, actually, in terms of the quality of the football from the first whistle to the last. And I think, as an Arsenal fan, I would imagine you must be getting very excited now, because I think United played extremely well. The back four was superb. We missed Casemiro to an extent, but it's not a big enough excuse. Arsenal missing a couple of people as well. But I think they kept playing football the right way. You know, they scored very late on, but there was never a panic. There was never a sort of, let's start hoofing it long, let's start getting flustered. They just kept on playing the game, and I was absolutely blown away by Saka. We had, I was watching it with my son, and we started talking at the start of the game about if United could buy any one player in the Arsenal team, who would it be? And we both absolutely agreed it was Bakary Saka, and he certainly lived up to that. But having said that, there's lots of players who would stroll into the United team at the moment. I think Partey would. I think it's a toss-up between Ramsdale and De Gea. I think Odegaard is playing absolutely superb. And Nketiah or Jesus, I'd rather have ahead of Weghorst or Anthony Martial. So, you know, I don't think many teams are going to take Arsenal as close as United did. And yet Arsenal 100% deserved to win. Scored 3 goals. They hit the post. De Gea made an incredible save right near the end. So I think City are better than Arsenal. But if Arsenal win their game in hand, that's an 8-point margin again. And I honestly don't think City are 8 points better than Arsenal. So I think it's looking extremely good for the Gunners.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I might sound like a bit of a biased Arsenal fan, but I mean, would you say City are better than Arsenal just in general? Or this season, would you say, you know, City are better than Arsenal based on how they've been playing this season? Just because, in my opinion, I think we're, you know, I might be a cocky sort of biased fan when I say this, but I think we're top of the table for a reason. I think we've quite outstanding. We have been the best team so far. And, you know, the one thing that might hold us back, and a lot of pundits have been sort of hit down for, is the squad, and that might sort of, you know, lead to us tripping up when it comes to actually clinching the title. But, you know, the proof is in the pudding. We haven't slipped up so far. We've sort of every storm that's been sort of sent our way, and we've done really well. So, you know, on the basis of performances this season, I would say Arsenal are the best team this season. But where are you coming from when you talk about City being the best team? Because I think in general they do have the best squad on paper, but with City, for me, it's just they haven't quite clicked yet. I think the sort of Haaland experiment, it's obviously doing really well, but it just hasn't quite materialized as well as I think Pep would want it to. But there's still times. He scored 2 today, and he's by far and ahead the top goal scorer. He's definitely going to finish top goals. But yeah, he's made a big difference to City. But I would say he's the reason why City are second right now, if you know what I mean.
I believe he scored a hat-trick today, and it's his third hat-trick of the season, if I've heard that right. I didn't see the game. They beat Wolves 3-0, and I understand he got his third hat-trick of the season.
Sorry, yeah.
Really won against United, but apparently he's on 23 goals, which would have won him the Golden Boot last season. And A, we're only in January, and B, technically we're in December, aren't we? Because the World Cup took a month out. So on that basis, I mean, Haaland is absolutely sensational. Not a great player, not one of the best players in the world, but certainly currently the best finisher in the world. And I suppose I watched the second half where City beat Spurs 4-2 the other night, and Spurs were 2 up at half time, but I missed the first half. But the camera panned across the bench, and you got Foden, and you know, and Mahrez came on and made an absolutely massive difference. Having said that, Arsenal have weathered the loss of Jesus, and then Nketiah's come in and played well. I see they've just bought Trossard and a central defender who certainly one of the journalists I saw on Sky Sports this morning said he's more excited about the new defender they've bought than he is about Trossard. So we're not a million miles behind. As I said, there's if Arsenal win their game in hand, and I think given how they dispense with United, who are a very decent side and played extremely well, I don't think many people are going to take points off Arsenal. A question for you: I gather they've still got to play City twice this season, and they're also playing them in the FA Cup on Friday. And I think I know the answer to this. If we look at the next two games, would you rather win the FA Cup tie or the next league meeting?
Yeah, you do know the answer to this. Definitely the league. I would have just bitten your hand off for Champions League qualification, but to actually be in this position where we're actually pushing to win the title, it's incredible. So yeah, I want to go all out for that. The FA Cup is secondary in my opinion. Not that either of them need to be mutually exclusive. We could essentially end up winning both, and that would be fantastic as well. But if I had to choose, I'd definitely choose the league, mate. What
was quite nice today is that United versus Arsenal was a genuine two teams in the top four battling for superiority. I watched the highlights of Liverpool and Chelsea yesterday, and I think when Sky got United, Arsenal, and BT got the Liverpool-Chelsea game, they were probably thinking that would have been the top of the table clash in January, and yet Liverpool and Chelsea are fighting over 8th, 9th, 10th place at the moment, aren't they? And are behind Fulham and all sorts of other teams, Brighton, I think. So it's really nice for United and Arsenal to be competing. Arsenal for the league, United for a top four, and we would have had your hand off, especially after losing 4-0 at Brentford and 2-1 at home to Brighton, and God knows where it was going at that point. We would have had your hand off to be in 3rd, 4th place at this stage. So it was nice to see two great clubs competing at the top of the league again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's great to see the likes of United and Arsenal back where they once were in the sort of late 90s and the early 2000s.
Having given you my take on Arsenal, I wonder what your take on United is at the moment.
Very impressive. I think that the last 10 games is a fantastic run that you've been on. Ten Hag has really got you guys well gelled, and he's got you playing some really exciting football. I just think you're still in that sort of process. You're still in a bit of a project at the moment, and I think it's not the finished article yet. I do think the two best informed teams at the moment are Man United and Arsenal, and that's for sure. And I think this will just be a blip for Man United. I think Man United will shape this and end up playing quite well. Who is your next game?
Well, I've got Forest in the Cup, and then can't remember. I know we've got Spurs coming up quite soon, but I can't remember what the actual fixture list is. I hate to say this because it sounds like a very entitled United fan, but there is a sequence of winnable games. I think they're at Newcastle, which I think they could easily go there and get something at Newcastle. So I think there's they played Arsenal twice, they played City twice. A lot of the two teams above them we won't be meeting again. So I'd say they're in pretty strong position. I mean, you mentioned Ten Hag. I think last time I did one of these, you were asking me why I thought Ralph Rangnick had been suddenly put in charge, and I had absolutely no idea whatsoever. I didn't know who he was, to be quite honest. But the thing with Ten Hag, I think some pundits and some United fans on phone-ins are kind of being lured into the trap of talking about him in the same breath as Sir Alex Ferguson. Ferguson was there for 27 years and won 38 trophies. Ten Hag's been there about 6 months and has still yet to win anything. But I do see where they're coming from. I think the type of things that he's got right are things that Ferguson got right. Getting rid of Ronaldo because of the influence he was having, dropping Marcus Rashford for waking up late and then bringing him on as a sub at Wolves to score the winning goal. I think his in-game management's very good. I think his half-time talks must be really influential. I think his buying policy has been pretty good. Casemiro in particular was an absolute stroke of genius. I think Martinez had a brilliant game today as well. So there's lots of things that he's getting right, and he's the first manager since Sir Alex Ferguson left to be getting a lot of those things right. And obviously turning Marcus Rashford into a player again when he was on his knees and just looked like, he was more interested in his politics than his football. So there's so many things that he's got right that I see exactly where people are coming from. I wouldn't have said this after the first 2 games of the season, but again, he held his nerve when things had gone very badly and nobody knew what was going to happen next. So there's lots of things about him that I'm incredibly impressed with.
Yeah, definitely. parallels between Arteta, especially, you know, the start of Arteta's reign when he came in, he had to deal with the likes of the sort of issues looming around, and a bang, you know, he sort of put down the hard line, and he, you know, Ten Hag has obviously had to do that with Ronaldo, and he's done it fantastically well. That, you know, there's obviously a lot of people out there against the idea of him, you know, sort of drawing this hard line on Ronaldo, but at the end of the day, it's for the betterment of the team, and it's clearly shown that you're heading in the right direction because of this. Well, not because of, but it's definitely contributed towards being successful on the pitch right now, I think.
I'd have a slight concern about Arteta. I think he's done an absolutely incredible job. But I noticed he got another yellow card today, and he's getting very animated on the touchline. And Pep Guardiola is always really sort of shrewd in his post-match interviews. I think the way he dealt with the City fans booing them off at half-time against Spurs a few days ago. And it just reminds me a little bit of the Ferguson-Kevin Keegan thing. And I think Arteta has to be a little bit careful to not start kind of overreacting to when there's pressure on and when things go slightly against him, because Guardiola will play the psychology game as well as Sir Alex did.
Yeah, as long as he doesn't come out doing any interview saying I'd love it if we beat them. But yeah, I think I can sort of see your worries. I can see your concerns. But that's what I love about Arteta, and I think that's what so many Arsenal fans love about it. Is he's so passionate. Yeah, I think, you know, our previous manager Unai Emery was equally as passionate, but I think the issue was not necessarily his passion, but just the convey his message across to the players. But one thing you can't doubt about Arteta is him getting his message across to he's completely got every single person on board, and that was part of the process of, you know, getting the likes of Aubameyang out and the likes of Ozil out, the people that just weren't all right, of having everybody pulling in the right direction. It's going fantastic well. I think one of the criticisms was of Arteta that he wasn't really a man to man. I think part of the process of getting those bad eggs out, if you were, and then getting the right apples in, it's clearly shown that he is a man-to-man manager if he has the right players at his disposal. And he's just, I think he's doing wonderful things right now. I think, you're right. Maybe his temperament on the side of the pitch needs a little bit wary, but at the same time, he's not the only manager to sort of lose his temper in the heat of battle. And I personally like that, just as long as he doesn't get. And I think he's got things under control to a degree. I think it was the Tottenham game. He was a little bit more restrained, going all out. He was, was a bit more calmer. So I think he knows when to sort of to reel it in, if you will.
Most managers relax when they play Tottenham, I suppose. But and then the ironic thing, of course, is that he learned his coaching skills under Pep Guardiola, didn't he? He was Guardiola's number 2 at City for a while, so he's obviously taken a lot on board from that period.
Well, that's the interesting thing with Erik Ten Hag as well. Erik Ten Hag was under Pep when he was at Bayern Munich. Ten Hag, I believe, was the sort of Bayern Munich, I think, a junior coach, or he might have been coach of the B team at the time Pep was there. So he's sort of so this sort of this triangle, if you will, at the top of the table with Arsenal, Man United, and Man City. It's very relationship that Ten Hag and Arteta have with Pep.
For me, Project Big Picture isn't acceptable.
If I can tell you that it's offside or onside, then accept it and move on.
And one of my big regrets, really, I probably should have ripped his head off.
I really don't like this. I know exactly what you want to do. I said what I said, do with it what you want.
I think what we've been watching is faintly farcical.
This idea that people in football, we're all going to look after each other with this football family, nonsense.
3 premierships, and I won more premierships alone than the other 19 managers together. 3 for me and 2 for them. Respect.
Right, I guess we'll get stuck into the crux of our discussion. So let's talk about the World Cup. Really, I mean, it's been such a long time now. I think I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they said, it's been a month since the World Cup final, which is crazy to think. For me, it feels like it was just yesterday. But I mean, how do you feel about the World Cup after everything that happened in terms of the tragic human rights issues in the build up to the tournament? Are you able to say that you enjoyed the World Cup in any way?
I absolutely am. I mean, working backwards from the final, I've seen a lot. I was born in 1961, so I've seen a lot of World Cups, and it was by far the best final I've ever seen. Brazil against Italy in 1970 was, the sexiest football coming from one team. But for a competitive element, I think the big players turned up. I was kind of slightly veering towards Argentina in the final, largely because France won it 4 years ago, and I didn't really want to see a repeat winner. But I was absolutely on my knees hoping that neither Mbappe or Messi missed a penalty. I think a lot of people tapped it a little bit too much to the kind of soap opera of the star players, but they both absolutely turned up in the final. It took Mbappe a while to get there, but when he did turn up, he certainly turned up big time. And of course, Messi was absolutely superb. I'm a bit of a socialist activist. I'm a member of Bolton Socialist Club, and a lot of my, let's say, comrades absolutely boycotted the game. I know people who run pubs that are sometimes performing who boycotted the games, and I totally 100% get that. I understand why some people didn't want to tap in for it for the very reasons you talked about, the human rights things, that whole business about the rainbow and not being able to wear it. But if some teams had boycotted, if a couple of teams early on and say, we're not playing in that country, and then it had been a kind of house of cards and the whole thing had tumbled, and they'd pushed the World Cup back a year and put it on somewhere else, I would have absolutely punched the air and celebrated it. But at the end of the day, if the teams are turning up, if the BBC and Sky are turning up, and you're a football fan, I think you more or less just have to not ignore that background or the context in which we were looking at it, but we had to kind of park it, put it to one side, and just enjoy what was an absolute feast of football. Pretty much the whole way through. There was one or two games that that stunk the place out a little bit, but I would say the vast majority of games, there was some absolutely massive surprises along the way. A couple of the big teams went out. Obviously, Morocco. My son's a football journalist, and my ex-partner, his mum was Moroccan, so we were very invested in the progress of Morocco, which was nothing short of sensational. So yeah, there was lots of things to be loved about it, even though part of me felt a bit of a guilty conscience a lot of the time I was watching it.
No, absolutely. For myself personally, it was in a way a bit of a bittersweet, tainted experience. I guess it's the closest I'll feel to being a Newcastle fan in a way, where you can't help but enjoy the incredible sporting ride the club's on, but you also can't really ignore the atrocious exploits in which their ownership is involved in. But I guess it's just, I'm the same as you. It's one of those where you kind of refuse to ignore the atrocities. And I kind of pay my respects and do what I can, but you can't help but be excited like yourself, with that football that was on display. It was absolutely incredible. FIFA, I will say, is an absolute shambles and thoroughly needs to get its house in order, but I don't think any football fan allows these organisations to dampen or distract them from their passion of the game. Organising bodies have sadly, killed these parts of the game, and large areas of football are affected in that way. I'm sure we'll get into this later, but football still, in my opinion, manages to invoke a love and a passion for its fans. Yeah. And in a way, you can't help but be moved by some of the twists and turns that this World Cup has brought up.
What you say about the administration is absolutely right. I mean, on the one hand, you've got Sepp Blatter coming out into the press and saying it was completely wrong to have it in Qatar. Well, give back the blood money then if it was such a bad idea. And then you've got Infantino with that very David Brent type speech about I am black, I am gay, and all that sort of stuff. There was the people who were running the game at the very top level came across as absolute idiots. I'm not entirely impressed with the BBC. I think just not showing the opening ceremony, but just then not paying no more than lip service to the context in which the games were being played. I think maybe the broadcasters could have been a little bit more upfront about it. I don't know if you saw Gary Neville. You probably wouldn't have seen it, but there's a satirical show called Have I Got News for You, where they have lots of different guest panelists, and Gary Neville actually hosted it. I don't know what he was thinking of, but he actually hosted it about 3 weeks before the World Cup, and Ian Hislop, the editor of Private Eye, the satirical magazine, absolutely tore into him, and Gary Neville attempted to defend himself by saying, you either stay at home or you go there and comment on what's going on. To which Ian Hislop said, well, you could stay at home and comment on what's going on. And I think, the whole thing was shrouded in hypocrisy, really. And there's lots of things I was uncomfortable about watching. But as I said, I've turned 61 now, so I'm not being morbid, but I count my mortality and how many more World Cups I've got left. So I can't really bypass one, and I'm certainly glad I didn't bypass this purely in terms of the football. As I say, parking the politics in a way that, as a sometimes St. Pauli fan, is probably not appropriate. But I'm not gonna be a hypocrite. I'm going to admit that I didn't watch all of it because obviously I work full time, so there was games that were on while I was at work. I got very good at recording games and making sure I didn't put my radio on in my car on the way home and watching them as if they were live, even when they'd kind of taken place 4 hours earlier in the day. So I managed to see quite a lot of football. And as I say, if you're judging it just on the quality of football, it was a brilliant World Cup.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just focusing on the football for a second, match of the tournament for you?
It's got to be the final, really. I mean, there was so many good games along the way, but at half time, I didn't think it was going to be a good final because it just looked like Argentina were kind of strolling away with it. But when the second half started, and I very rarely want games to go to extra time and penalties, but funnily enough, this time I really did. I wanted it to go through to the bitter end. I wanted the occasion to keep on happening. Obviously, my passion for Morocco, and particularly, although it was only 1-0 when they beat Portugal, I really loved that game. I actually thought Morocco competed extremely well against France. I think they had quite a bulk of the possession. I think they played a lot of the best football. They just didn't particularly have any finishing. They didn't score many goals in the World Cup, Morocco. I think they scored 4 or 5, which is unusual for a team that got as far as the semi-final. But I think in terms of the quality of the play, and then Giroud and somebody else scored a couple of goals against them when the chances rose. But weirdly, even though France competed brilliantly in the final and were one of the best teams, clearly one of the best teams in the world, I think Morocco were very unlucky not to have beaten them in that semi-final. So there was lots of. I love the Argentina-Netherlands one as well, where Netherlands played the most audacious free kick you could possibly imagine in the 94th minute to take it into extra time. I think I'm right in saying it was Weghorst United's new centre forward who scored that goal, but it was the genius of the way it was manufactured, really. I suppose what we haven't talked about though is how we felt about England.
Yeah, it was disappointing, but to fall out of the competition to France, who so narrowly ended up, missing out on the, there's no shame in it, really. I still have my, I still have my concerns, I guess, when it comes to Gareth Southgate. I'm not entirely sure if he's the right guy. It's, just having that little bit of doubt, having that lack of passion. When he first came in, the first World Cup in 2018, the Euros, I was really excited about the football that he got us going and got us playing. But just the last year or so, things have just really deflated with Gareth Southgate. Maybe it is the sort of defensive tactics that he seems to go for when he seems to sort of fade out over using this wonderful array of attacking talent which he has at his disposal, and he just seems to always sort of play on the safe side instead of really going all out attack. And it's a weird one, really.
I think you're right. I think England were unlucky in many ways. I think drawing France when they did was very unfortunate. They could have progressed a lot further and grown into the tournament a little bit more. I think we had some of the outstanding players. I think both Saka and Bellingham were absolutely sensational. Foden had some great moments as well. Where I agree with you on Southgate, I think sometimes his team selection and his use of substitutes was not as effective as it could have been. I mean, the obvious one, and I'm saying this as a United fan, is that Rashford almost beat Wales single-handedly in that second half when England weren't playing very well, and his reward was to get dropped in the next game. And I think France would have been quite relieved to see Rashford on the bench for that game. So I think some of his decisions were a bit suspect. Having said that, when Harry Kane stepped up to take that second penalty, I've never been more confident in my life that it was going to hit the back of the net. His record on penalties is not brilliant, but the way he'd taken the first one, I just wonder whether it counted against him. It was his club goalkeeper who was playing against him, Lloris, who actually has played pretty crap for Spurs, but had a very good tournament. But yeah, so I think, I see what you're saying about Southgate, but my main criticism of him was some of the in-game decisions that he made.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he pulled Saka as well and brought Grealish on, and that was just a what are you doing kind of substitution. And yeah, I think I think you're absolutely right to make these decisions in game that just seem to baffle at the moment. And I think in the early sort of tenure of his career, he was he was his right, and I do just feel as if there's maybe just a bit of a spark that he's lost a little bit, or maybe he's just, it's, I don't know, for whatever reason, it just seems to not be clicking used to.
I swung the podcast in a different direction there, but wondered what was your game of the tournament?
The tournament, I think, was the Argentina-Netherlands game. Obviously, that final had an incredible finish to it, and it was a hell of a bang of an ending. But the roughly, I agree with you what you were saying. I think for 75 minutes, Argentina were all over them and was more or less coasting. It was just at the end of it. But also, the Netherlands game, it was kind of similar. It was almost fantastic to just see Van Gaal come up with this really sort of impressive tactical manoeuvring to bring on these two target men, massive lumps of strikers, put them on. I was thinking, what on earth are you doing, Van Gaal? But it absolutely paid off, and it saw them take the game to penalties, and it was just a fantastic game in the end. I think I'm maybe a little bit biased because obviously I'm living here in the Netherlands, and my wife and my daughter are both Dutch, so I've got that bit of interest to the Netherlands. But it was I just love that game personally.
Do you remember Van Gaal in the last World Cup where he brought on Tim Krul for a penalty shootout, and that was a brilliant psychological move as well, because the other team suddenly thought, he's brought on the goalkeeper who saves the penalties kind of thing. Incidentally, on the subject of penalties, there was a lot of penalties in that World Cup, and I don't know about you, but I thought in the early stages the standard of the penalties was absolutely atrocious. I remember Lewandowski taking a couple of awful ones. It got much better, and towards the end, but there was these very strange manoeuvres going on where people were hesitating and trying to trick the goalkeeper, and 9 times out of 10 it wasn't working. And I thought, who the hell's going to start scoring these penalties? The penalty shootouts are all going to be 0-0. But fortunately, I'm glad Croatia didn't go much further, because in many ways I admired Croatia, but they just seem to be grinding everything to penalty shootouts, and apart from the final, I'm not a big fan of penalty shootouts generally.
No, I agree. I think, a lot of the actual standards of penalty shootouts in the World Cup weren't great, but in a way that sort of led to that excitement, because it ended up being so narrowly close in a lot of the shootouts. But it wasn't great. I don't know about you, but one of the most annoying things I find is that stuttery sort of run up before hitting the ball, and trying to sort of get in the keeper's head, or trying to beat the keeper before you've kicked the ball. It's it does annoy. I think having seen Jorginho and Bruno Fernandes take similar sort of penalties as well, it's just it's kind of annoying. Just in a way, I just want to see sort of the traditional 90s run up and smash it into wherever it ends up going, to really smash it into the back of the net, right down the middle, if you will.
I think it might have been the Canadian player who missed one, who took a kind of Paul Pogba, one of those silly little tiptoeing run-ups and that type of thing. But I would just mention in an honourable mention the Moroccan player Hakimi, who scored the winner against Spain, and he just basically just flicked it up the middle. And I think that type of penalty should now be called a Hakimi, in the same way that Panenka of Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, as now is.
I think the best thing about that was his celebration.
Yeah.
Celebrating like a penguin. God knows what sort of led him to do that, but it was brilliant.
Which team disappointed you the most?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it feels like it's such a long time ago now. I'm trying to think back to.
I thought Germany were quite weak.
Yeah.
I had high hopes for Brazil, and Brazil had their moments, but I don't think with the quality of players that they had out on the pitch that they anywhere near. I think a lot of people had Brazil down as winners, and I don't think they looked anything like that by the end of the tournament. I think they were quite weak and lacking in goals. Surprisingly, I thought they would have scored a lot more goals.
I think they were too busy dancing half of the time. That was almost like they're practicing their celebrations before they'd even sort of won any games. It was
Spain were interesting as well. Spain, I think they scored 7 in
Germany. I think Germany.
Yeah, I think Spain scored 7 in the first game, but against Costa Rica, who turned out to be not that bad, but were absolutely dreadful in that game. And then Spain just seemed to dry up. But having scored 7 goals with, I think, 7 different players, they couldn't buy a goal. They were really struggling to get the ball in the net. So, Yeah, so Spain, Germany, and Brazil were all slightly disappointing for me.
I think Spain are an odd one because, regardless of whichever manager they have, it's, the sort of players that they have at their disposal, it doesn't seem to be right. It just doesn't seem to work. I think, they just don't have an out-and-out striker. Obviously, what's his name? He seems to just play for as many big teams as he can all over the world. He's played for Juventus and I think he's at Atletico at the moment. He played for Chelsea at a point. I've really forgotten his name.
Morata?
Yes, Morata. Yes, thank you. I don't know how he seems to just buy himself a wonderful, when it comes to actually being the sort of target man and the main man. He seems to score goals and he can find the back of the net at times, but in terms of just taking the team over the edge and being as consistent as what's sort of asked of him, he just doesn't seem to have it. He just really just works in hot flashes. But it's a weird one with Spain, really.
Do you think the alcohol ban was influential? Because there was some extremely good celebrating crowds. I think Morocco and I think the African teams in general brought a real kind of blast of colour and drums and music and all that type of thing. And as far as I can gather, there wasn't any trouble. I certainly didn't read about any. But my son was actually out there as a journalist. And although there's so many reasons that we've already discussed why Qatar was completely the wrong location, from a journalist point of view, it was great because I think it's supposed to be about the size of Birmingham or the size of Yorkshire, is it? So it was actually, it was in Russia 4 years ago, and obviously he had to stay in the same place because Russia's absolutely huge. But in Qatar, he was actually able to get to, games every single day, and it was much more convenient. He said it was a bit soulless. There was a lot more. He was in Samara in Russia, and there was a lot more happening culturally there. But on the one hand, it's convenient for journalists, but he said culturally it had absolutely nothing. And he said there wasn't really that culture of the fan parks where you get all the fans mixing together in different coloured shirts and waving different coloured flags and having a bit of a laugh together. And I don't know whether that was influenced by the lack of alcohol, because you could argue that an alcohol ban was one of the things that Qatar could have had in its favour. But I just wonder if you think it had any influence on the tournament at all.
No, not really. I think just in terms of, like you say, there wasn't really any reports of any violence like that. And I think, if you're there as a spectator and you're actually getting involved in everything, you perhaps would enjoy a drink. I'm not a drinker myself, but just the fact that that's sort of taken away from things, and that just that choice and the ability for people to freely choose to drink. I suppose it is easier to maintain and to police, and that's probably why we haven't seen any violence or any reports of violence, and that thing. But like you say, I think football and alcohol at times do sort of go hand in hand, and it's obviously the nasty side of the game you don't want to see, but it has brought a lot of joy, and it has brought a lot of cultural kind of violence to the game, and that's that was lacking. Then I guess it's a bit of a shame.
I think the knock-on effect was that a lot of fans just didn't bother travelling, and Qatar was always going to be a bit of a tough ask financially with the cost of living crisis we've got at the moment. But I'm wondering with a lot of England, Dutch, German fans, that was the kind of final straw that put them off, and maybe they'd rather watch it back at home on a big screen with as many pints of beer in front of them as they wanted, sort of thing. And I'm just wondering why that's maybe why some of the countries that don't have a culture of alcohol were the ones that were most noticeable and most visible in terms of the celebrations that were going on in the stands. I suppose a lot of local people got a chance to see it, because I've got no quarrel at all with the Qatari people. I hope they really enjoyed watching the games on their doorstep. So maybe that's why the atmosphere seemed very different at some of the games, some of the European games.
Yeah, I think the biggest qualms I would have with the fact that they banned alcohol was just the fact that it was done. I think wasn't it like 2 days before the kickoff of the World Cup? It was like really short notice, and I think that was a bit of a shame. They're not really sort of giving anybody a chance. So I think half of these fans and half of the nations that were there, I would say most of all the nations were there. They were probably fully expecting to partake in alcohol. So it was it was just in a weird way. It was a bit of a disappointment in the way that it was organised, really.
I suppose the consequences of trying to secretly drink the kind of black market setup where it just wasn't worth the risk, given the potential punishments that would be dished out. So yeah, I suppose that would have certainly put me off if I.
Shall we get into fears for the future of football? I know this is something that you're quite passionate about and something you wanted to talk about. I mean, what's your biggest concern, really? Is it the European Super League? Is it the new Swiss format for the Champions League? Is it the 48 teams in the next World Cup? Although that's apparently under reconsideration. Or is it the fact that human rights abuse just seems commonplace and it's accepted behaviour?
I'd have to say all of the above. We talked before about Newcastle United, and there's Newcastle fans who've been passionate for many years and have grown up standing on the terrace and all that type of thing. And it's similar to what happened with City a few years ago. It's like we're gonna take away the soul of your club, and they rebranded St James's Park long before any of this happened. And then World Cups in Qatar. They're now talking about there might be one in Saudi Arabia a little bit further down the line and all that type of thing. And you mentioned the Super League. And there does seem to be a real fear that it's being taken away from the real fans. I think one of the best stories I heard recently, I suppose it all started with things like Sky televising football and no more, pay-per-view and no longer free-to-air sort of thing. And I heard a great story about there was a Liverpool versus Everton derby match going back a few years now. And normally all the pubs would be empty because everybody would be in Goodison Park or Anfield. The pubs were absolutely rammed with people watching the game on television because it was being beamed all the way to Norway and then being beamed all the way back to pubs in Liverpool. So the stadiums are full of what Roy Keane described at Old Trafford as the prawn sandwich brigade. And I think maybe to a large extent the way the money is taken over. I don't think we've seen the back of the Super League. I think what was really hypocritical about that, the various teams who came out suddenly did a very quick U-turn when they realised that the whole fan base was against it and started saying, we've got great pride in this club. We're going to withdraw from the Super League. But it's like, if you've got such pride in your club, why did you enter into negotiations in the first place? So end of rant. But I think it's the way the money is controlling everything at the moment, which is my biggest fear. So that morality becomes secondary to how many points you're picking up on the pitch. The other side to that, I heard somewhere that West Bromwich Albion have brokered their stadium and are almost kind of gambling on the fact that they'll go up this season. And if they don't, with all the money in the Premier League that would come to them, there's a very good chance that West Bromwich Albion, a historical club, could be the next one that goes to the wall. And of course, we've already lost a few. I live quite close to Bury, where Bury FC were doing quite well in, I think, the Championship. And then because the rug was pulled out of them and they couldn't keep the stadium, and I've got friends who could tell you a lot more about this than I can. I think you did a Bury podcast with Chris Bainbridge, a good friend of mine. So, bigger clubs than Bury are going to go to the wall, are going to be buried, if you pardon the pun, if it continues to go this way. And, there's a Super League with all the multi-millionaires making loads of money. It's a bit like society at the moment, where you've got people who are worth millions. It's something like 90% of the wealth of the country is owned by a very small percentage, and then you've got people sleeping rough in doorways. And I think football is basically mirroring society in that way.
No, definitely. Because I think I saw a statistic or just a graphic not so long ago saying how much the Premier League has spent so far just in this January transfer window. I think it's, with the sort of acquisition of Mudryk to Chelsea, I think it's a total of about 300 million. Whereas the rest of Europe, I think the likes of Spain, Germany, France, I think they're sort of the totals that they've reached is still below 100. So it goes to show, I think, in England itself, in the Premier League, in relation to the rest of it, that there's that massive imbalance financially, and that's worrying as well. I do think, the astronomical amounts of wages just in football in general, not just wages but also transfer fees. People are saying that they're worried that it's, burst the ceiling. But in my opinion, I think it's already done that. And I think, now we're just sort of seeing the detrimental side of it. And we're seeing, such a huge chasm of imbalance between all teams. And like you say, the ones that will pay for it are the sort of smaller historic clubs and the likes of West Brom, which is a real shame.
It's interesting what you say about the market, because I just feel the numbers have just become completely irrelevant. There's a great story. It's a bit of a myth that Trevor Francis was the first £1 million footballer from Birmingham to Nottingham Forest, because Brian Clough says in his biography he got Forest to pay £1 less than £1 million, so that Trevor Francis wasn't the first £1 million footballer. It was a guy called Steve Daly who moved from Wolves to City for 1.4 million. But in those days it was like, wow, £1 million footballer. Wow, Kenny Dalglish is £750,000 from Celtic to Liverpool. Now, is Harry Maguire worth £80 million? Is Jude Bellingham worth £150 million? Is Declan Rice worth £200 million? Who cares? None of it's relevant. They're just kind of figures floating around in the air now, aren't they? They're not real money because of the amount of liquidity that's coming into the clubs anyway, because they'll sell 10 million if they buy them.
Yeah, and when you sort of reflect that onto the backdrop of society, like you were saying earlier, it's kind of sickening, really. It's just the real sort of contrast between the two. It's kind of hard to take, but I think it's all going back to the feelings that we have around the World Cup. You can't help but just you have to, in a way, just sort of focus on the positives of football. You have to focus on why we love the game, and because otherwise you'll just end up crying in the corner, and you'll end up looking at things in such a negative way.
You mentioned the World Cup, the next one, where did you say it's going to be 42 teams? I think that's right, isn't it? And there was talk about putting 42 teams into groups of 3, so you only played 2 games, and then you went into the next round. And the weird thing, I think the next World Cup's in Canada, USA, and Mexico. And I'm 61 now, so I'm due to retire in a couple of years' time. I can more or less choose my own time to go. I work in education, so I could afford to go in the next couple of years. I'm almost thinking I have to retire before the next World Cup, because they're going to be 42 games. If it's going to be on the other side of the world, they're going to be playing at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. I want to be in a position where I don't have to wake up the next day. But I'm being slightly frivolous here. I don't see why we need a 42-game World Cup. It's probably because a team like Italy didn't qualify this time round, and the amount of lost revenue that FIFA will have because Italy have not made it to the World Cup in terms of television rights and everything else. So I think they're absolutely terrified of any big clubs being shortchanged. So we'll get a World Cup where we're going to get Iceland and Ireland and Belarus and all these teams. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's great when a team qualifies unexpectedly, but it's not going to be great, is it? Because there's practically going to be no teams in the world that haven't made it. So the actual credibility of somebody like Wales getting to the first World Cup since 1958, it's going to be really embarrassing if anybody doesn't get to a World Cup that's got 42 teams in it. And it's the old adage about why fix something that's not broken. We've just had an absolutely fantastic World Cup. Unfortunately, it was in Qatar, but in football terms, it was a brilliant tournament. So why are we suddenly chopping and changing it in any way that, the answer is simple, because it'll generate more revenue if they do it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tony, I know we had it sort of scheduled to talk about VAR, which, in all honesty, we're probably going to have to put a lot of time aside to do that, because VAR is as much of a topic as But unfortunately, I've got a bit of a parenting emergency that I've got to attend to.
I think you did say an hour anyway, so that suits me anyway. Yeah, that was good fun.
Yeah, no worries at all. But no, thank you so much for coming on again, Tony, and it's been brilliant to talk to you. And it's just hopefully I'll get you on again soon, and we'll talk about VAR.
Sorry, I should have said at the start, we were so busy messing about with the controls, but congratulations on your new arrival. I think I sent you a message, but let me just tell you face to face. Congratulations. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Tony. Yeah, that means a lot. She's she's a real bundle of joy. I think she she had about a dangerous sort of 2.5 hour nap around about 6 o'clock, and I think we've learned a lesson that we try and get them to not nap as much of a power nap as much as that when it's so close to her actual bedtime, because I think she's sort of turbocharged and causing her mum a lot of issues downstairs. So I'm gonna have to go down and rescue my wife, and hopefully.
Yeah, no worries, Simon. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Triple F. If you could please drop a like on our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter, that would be massively appreciated. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the Triple F.